Impersonation is such a key part of social engineering, and I want to give you 3 specific examples of where I've seen it in play, either by me having the opportunity to exercise an impersonation attack, a bank behaving in a way that appeared to be impersonation, and then another financial institution demonstrating how a legitimate organisation should behave in order to give their customers confidence that it's not a social engineering attack aimed at identity theft. Let's start the story here. And this is a true story where my wife had asked me to go to the doctor's and pick up a prescription for her. Now, normally this is something that she'd pick up herself, but she was at home sick in bed, so she asked me to go. Now, when I went into the doctor's office and asked for the prescription, they responded and said, look, they're sorry, but they needed her to come in and do it in person. That's not unusual in order to fulfill a medical prescription. But of course, that wasn't really an option, and I made it clear that she was sick, but I asked if they could just possibly give her a call. Now, in this case, they didn't actually have her number, which left us in a bit of a quandary. So I offered them a solution. Perhaps I could call her for them. They were quite happy for me to do that. But knowing what you now know about social engineering and impersonation, you can probably spot the problem. They were willing to let me, the person that they would not allow to directly pick up the prescription, to direct them to the person they could talk to verify identity. Now, all they wanted to do was to talk to my wife, but I could have called anyone. They effectively gave me control of the verification process. Now, I did legitimately call my wife and she said, yes, I've sent my husband in to collect the prescription. Please allow him to pick it up. But I could have called anyone because I, the person under suspicion, had complete control of the verification process. That's one example. Let me give you another one. I got a call one day. So the phone rang, and then after I picked up the phone, there was a long pause. It sounded like a very long distance call. And then after that, an operator with a foreign accent started talking, and it sounded like they were on a VoIP connection. The sort of connection that would be very cheap, if not freely available from other locations. It sounded suspicious. But what the person on the other end of the line said next is what made me especially suspicious. They told me that they were my bank, and they just wanted to verify some of my information. Now, this had me curious. I wonder what sort of information they'd like to verify. So I said, okay, how would you like to do that? And then they started asking me personal information. They wanted my date of birth. Now this, like the last 4 digits of a credit card, is a data attribute which is regularly used for verification purposes. There was every possibility that they wanted my date of birth so that they could then go and steal my identity from somewhere else. So I responded, I'd like to verify them first. And the caller was incredulous. They couldn't believe it. They were saying, but we're your bank. We need to verify you. But clearly, I wasn't going to turn around and give them my date of birth. In fact, I made it very clear, I need to verify you. Can I call you back? Now, to me, this was quite reasonable because I wanted to independently verify their identity. Their response to this? They offered to give me the phone number. And this is not dissimilar to the doctor's surgery example, because here we have a situation where the party under suspicion, so in this case the caller, is offering me something which really gives them control of the verification process. They could give me a number, but I'd have to verify it. In fact, I offered, okay, give me a number, I'll verify it with the one on the website. To which they responded, well, this is a different number. It's not the same one that's on the website. We're a different arm of the bank. At this stage, I told them I believed it was a phishing attack and I hung up. They called back the following day and we repeated the process and I hung up again. They called back on the weekend and we repeated the process yet again, after which I decided I had to report it to my bank. It was only at that point that I discovered it really was my bank that had called. That bank, though, had a fundamental flaw in their process. They ticked so many different boxes which should alert the customer to a potential phishing attack and obviously had no training whatsoever about how the customer should actually independently verify the caller. So it was a massive shortcoming in their implementation, a multi-billion-dollar bank too. Now, as bad as that example is, let me give you one more example of a financial institution that got it right. So I had another call one day, and it was a somewhat similar process in that the caller said, "Hey, we're from your credit card company, and we've detected a fraudulent transaction on your card. We'd like to verify that we're speaking to the right person." Now, it's perfectly reasonable for a credit card company to want to do this, but it's equally reasonable for me to want to verify them. Now, this time, the whole process took a very different turn to the last example. The operator simply said, "Call us on the number on the back of your credit card." It was that easy. I pulled the card out of my wallet, looked up the number, which of course couldn't have been faked by a social engineer, called them back, and got straight through to the same operator again. It was an extremely simple process, and the operator was clearly well prepared for this question. They understood the indicators of a possible social engineering attack, and they knew the right answers to give the customers so that they could have confidence that they themselves were not being socially engineered. Those three stories are great examples of how all of us, in our everyday lives, come across the risk of social engineering and impersonation, and indeed how you will inevitably identify deficiencies in verification processes now that you know what to look for. So that was a good example of where some in-person social engineering could have easily taken place. And of course, how financial institutions can both get it wrong and get it right. Let's now move on and summarize the module.